What does a rider over 70 look for in a horse?
Welcome to the Midlife Rider Project. This is a place for riders who have lived a little and learned a lot. A place for honest reflection, lived experience, and listening for the wisdom that emerges as we ride through this second season of life.
I came across an ad recently. Someone was looking for a horse, not for themselves, but on behalf of a rider who was over 70 and wanted to get back in the saddle. I stopped scrolling and I just thought about that for a minute. Over 70, still looking for a horse and still wanting to get out there with a horse. This rider isn't giving up or walking away from riding life. They're just looking for the right horse to do this next chapter with. And that notion has stayed with me since I read that ad because I think it says everything about what this episode is about. And honestly, everything about why I'm here doing this podcast at all. This week, I want to talk about what it actually means to be a rider in midlife and not the cautionary tale version of it. You've already heard the be careful, you're not as young as you used to be version of it. I mean the real version where we're more capable than we've ever been in a lot of ways, and we're not remotely interested in sitting down and shutting up about it. So let's begin with what we're actually bringing to the arena now. And I think that nobody really talks about this when they're busy reminding us to be careful. We know things, not just writing things, though obviously there's that, but life things, the kind of knowledge that only comes from having navigated a few decades of complicated situations, difficult relationships, high stress, high stakes moments, and the kind of days where everything goes sideways and you just handle it anyway. That stuff doesn't disappear once we swing a leg over a horse. It comes along with us. At 25, a horse that was having a moment could send me into a spiral of anxiety that lasted the rest of the ride. And it wasn't because I wasn't a good rider, but because I didn't yet have the emotional resources to separate what was happening from what it meant. Now I can feel a horse getting tense underneath me, and something in my body just kind of settles down a little. Not because I'm fearless, but because I've lived enough to know that most things can be worked through if you stay calm and pay attention. You've probably heard the saying that only one of you gets to panic and it's never your turn. It really is like that. The ability to regulate yourself in the presence of an animal that reads your nervous system like a book comes from experience, real experience, and that's the kind you get by living. The problem solving, the patience, the capacity to deal with something that's frustrating and not just blow it up. These are life skills we learn out of the saddle that translate directly to what we do in the saddle. We just don't give ourselves credit for bringing them along. As a midlife rider, you're not starting over so much as you're starting from here. And here is actually a pretty remarkable place to begin. Now, the body definitely has a few notes here. And I guess I would be doing all of us a disservice if I didn't acknowledge that the body at this stage of life has some rather strong opinions. There's that hot flash that arrives in the middle of a lesson with no warning and zero concern for what you're doing. One minute you're working on a new movement, and the next minute you're genuinely considering whether the horse's water trough is an appropriate place to cool down. It is not, probably, maybe. And then there's the bladder situation. And look, if you're a woman who has had children and also rides horses, you've already done the math on this one. Rising trot can throw us a curve that nobody warned us about. We adapt, we manage, and we possibly invest in some technical apparel, and we say nothing more about it. And then there's the joint that didn't used to make that clicking noise, or a hip that needs a good 10 minutes to remember what it's doing. The morning after a long ride where getting out of bed requires a level of strategy and commitment that frankly deserves its own blue ribbon. And here's the thing about all of this, it's funny. Not in a dismissive way or in a way that makes light of what can be genuinely hard, but in a way that things are funny when they're universally true and we all know it. And pretending otherwise just makes the experience feel lonely. Every woman in midlife has a version of this story. The details vary, but the experience being universal does not. And there's something genuinely connecting about that, about being in a sport together at a stage of life where the body is doing what it's doing, and we're all just out here riding anyway. That's part of what makes us midlife riders. Horses also keep us in the game. And I want to talk about that a little bit because they really do a lot for us at this stage of life. And I don't think we talk about it enough to, especially those who advise us to give it up. They'll tell us to give up riding altogether and find a gentle hobby. Think about the consequences of breaking something at your age, they advise us. But horses keep us moving, and not just physically, though that matters, but there's the strength and the balance and the core work that happens, whether you call it exercise or not. But moving in the larger sense, engaged, curious, trying new things, doing hard things. Horses don't let you phone it in. You have to show up, actually show up, present and paying attention every single time. And that requirement, that daily or weekly demand to be fully there, keeps something alive in us that a more passive way of life would not. And there's problem solving, working out why this one is spooking in that corner, why this one needs a different warm up today, or maybe this one is telling you something is off and you need to figure out what. That kind of engaged thinking, that back and forth with another creature, keeps the brain working in ways that matter to us in this phase of life. And of course, there's something about the physicality of barn work, the grooming and tacking up, all of it. It keeps us connected to our body in a way that is genuinely good for us. We're not punishing ourselves. We're doing useful, physical, grounding work. Horses just don't let you rest. That might be the simplest way to say it. As long as you are still doing it, you're still doing it. You're moving and thinking and feeling and growing. At any age, that is genuinely not nothing. And let's say this very plainly too. Nobody gets to tell you when to quit. There's an assumption that floats around, and sometimes it's said out loud, but more often it's just this feeling, this undertow, that at some point, the sensible thing to do is step back from riding. That 50 is when you start to wind down, or that 60 is when you really should think about it, and that 70 is, well, impressive, but surely temporary. And I want to push back on that. The risks are real. We know it. We're not cavalier about it. We know our bodies are different than they were, and that the consequences of a fall can be more significant. Healing takes longer, and riding with awareness and intention matters more now than it used to. And none of that is up for debate. But awareness and intention are not the same thing as quitting altogether. And the assumption that the responsible thing to do is gradually remove yourself from something that gives your life meaning Well, that deserves to be looked at carefully because I'm not sure it's actually about safety. I think sometimes it's about what we've been told is appropriate for women of a certain age. And we've been told a lot of things about what's important for women of a certain age. We're not 25, but we are also not done. Those two things can exist at the same time without any contradiction. The rider over 70 looking for a horse isn't being reckless. She's being herself. She knows what she's doing. She knows what she wants, and she's going after it. And I think she speaks for a lot of us. We are experienced. We are capable. We have the skills and the self knowledge and the determination to do this with joy and intention as long as it makes sense for us to do it. And when we decide that it no longer makes sense, we will decide it on our own terms. I keep thinking about that ad. Someone over 70 looking for a horse, not looking back, not giving up, still looking forward, still doing it after all these years, still going. And that's the image I want all of us to hold on to. Not as some exceptional story about someone who's unusually brave or maybe unusually stubborn, but as a completely normal picture of what it looks like to love horses and keep going. Because that's what we do. We're not starting over. We're starting from here, where everything we've learned and survived and figured out makes it a pretty good place to ride from. I'd love to hear your story. So please leave a comment or send me an email on Substack. You can find me at Midlife Rider Project. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated, I hope you'll join me again next week as we continue riding through this season together. Until then, take good care of yourself and your horse.